The airport was alive with its usual symphony, heels clacking on polished floors, rolling suitcases rumbling like distant thunder, and the low murmur of anxious travelers checking screens and boarding passes. Amid the chaos sat an elderly man in a wheelchair, still and composed, his hands folded over a faded green military jacket that looked as if it had lived 100 lives. His name was Thomas Reed, though no one there knew that name carried weight. Not yet. The man waited calmly near the first-class boarding lane, eyes sharp, quietly observing the bustling gate area. He wasn't in a rush. He had long learned that patience, not panic, carried you furthest in life. But just a few feet away stood Vanessa Cole, a senior flight attendant with a crisp uniform and an even crisper attitude. Vanessa prided herself on control. She ran her gait with military precision, sharp eyes scanning for anything out of order. An oversized carry-on, a wrong zone boarder, or in this case, a man who didn't look like he belonged. She had worked in aviation for over a decade, and in that time she'd learned to make snap judgments. Who was worth the first-class smile and who wasn't? When her gaze landed on Thomas, something in her posture shifted. She didn't see the dignity in his bearing, the quiet authority in the way he waited. She saw a frail old man in a wheelchair wearing a jacket that looked like it belonged in a museum. Her heels clicked toward him. "Sir," she said, cool and clipped, "this lane is for first class and priority passengers only. General boarding will begin shortly." The words were sharp enough to draw the attention of a few nearby passengers. Some turned their heads slightly. Others pretended not to hear. Thomas looked up slowly, meeting her gaze without blinking. His voice was calm, steady, even kind. "I'm aware I have a first-class ticket." Vanessa's lips pulled into a tight smile, forced, impatient. "I see," she said, holding out her hand. "May I see your boarding pass?" Without complaint, Thomas reached into the front pocket of his worn coat and handed her the pass. She took it without a thank you, eyes scanning the name and seat number. 1A. Front row, premium class. Her brow twitched. It didn't make sense. He didn't look the part. "This must be a mistake," she muttered, almost to herself. Then louder. "Where did you get this ticket?" There was no malice in her voice, just that particular tone some people reserve for those they assume are trying to cheat the system. Before Thomas could answer, Vanessa turned to the young gate agent beside her, waving the pass toward him. "Can you verify this? Something's not right here." The gate agent, Derek, hesitated. He was new, still learning when to speak up and when to stay quiet. But something about the man in the chair, the way he held himself, the quiet patience in his eyes, gave Derek pause. He scanned the boarding passes. The system beeped, approved, no flags, no upgrades, fully paid. "It's valid," Derek said. "Seat 1A, first class." Vanessa's jaw tightened. Her pride stung. She turned back to Thomas with a half-hearted smile. "Even so," she said, her voice lowering but still sharp, "we need to ensure your wheelchair won't disrupt the cabin flow. First class has limited space. We prioritize the comfort of our high-tier passengers." Thomas didn't flinch. He nodded once, slowly. "Understood. I've traveled before." "Of course," Vanessa replied, but her tone made it clear she didn't believe he should have. She stepped aside with a forced smile and gestured toward the gate. "Please proceed. Just be mindful." And the message was clear. "Don't make me regret this." Passengers nearby exchanged looks. One woman in a sleek navy blazer shifted uncomfortably. A man behind her whispered something to his wife, eyes on the scene. But no one said anything aloud. No one wanted to get involved. As Thomas wheeled himself calmly toward the jet bridge, Vanessa turned to the side and exhaled in frustration. "First class isn't what it used to be," she muttered, not realizing her words weren't as quiet as she thought. Thomas heard her. Of course he did. He had spent decades in rooms where every word mattered, where what was said quietly often meant more than what was said out loud. He didn't react, didn't turn around, he just kept moving. But a part of him noted her words like a line in a logbook. This wasn't new to him. He had faced worse, far worse. But it still stung, not for himself, but for what it said about people like her. People who couldn't see beyond the surface. People who believed luxury belonged to a certain image, not character. Vanessa followed behind him at a clipped pace, her heels clicking a little louder now. her mood already fouled by the minor disruption to her perfectly rehearsed first-class performance. As they boarded the plane, Thomas's expression never wavered. Calm, unbothered. But deep inside, something had shifted. He had expected a simple flight, a quiet ride, but now he knew this wasn't just another journey. This flight was going to reveal something, and Vanessa Cole had just made the first and worst mistake of her career. The cabin lights glowed warmly as passengers settled into their first-class seats, tucking away briefcases and slipping off coats, the muted hum of polite conversation blending with the soft clink of champagne glasses. Vanessa Cole moved through the aisle like a conductor of her own orchestra, her posture upright, her smile poised, soothing, polished, and as curated as the service she prided herself on delivering. She offered a sparkling laugh to the man in 2B, nodded graciously at the elegantly dressed couple across the aisle, even complimented the young woman in a power suit for her exquisite handbag. Every movement, every gesture, radiated charm, but only to those who in her mind had earned it. Then she passed 1A, her smile vanished like a flipped switch. Her steps didn't slow. She didn't offer a greeting, not even a glance. The man seated there, Thomas Reed, sat quietly by the window, his military jacket folded neatly across his lap, his fingers resting still on the armrest. He didn't appear offended, but inside something settled heavy in his chest. Recognition. He'd seen this behavior before, not in war zones or crisis rooms, but in boardrooms, in hotel lobbies, in private lounges where status was mistaken for worth. Vanessa didn't see him. She saw a wheelchair, an old coat, and a face lined with time. In her mind, he didn't fit, and so she treated him like he didn't exist. Another flight attendant, Claire, watched from a distance as Vanessa lavished attention on the other passengers. She saw the way Vanessa knelt beside the tech executive in 1C to offer him a hot towel with both hands. How she giggled softly at his joke, just loud enough to be heard by the surrounding rows. Claire had worked under Vanessa's lead for almost a year, and by now she knew how things operated in Vanessa's version of first class. You weren't a priority unless you looked like one. She glanced toward 1A. Mr. Reed sat silently, his posture steady, but she could feel the tension radiating off him like low-frequency static. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't drawing attention. And still, Claire knew, he noticed. Vanessa returned to the front of the cabin where she began taking drink orders. Champagne or fresh-pressed juice, Mr. Walker? She beamed at the gentleman in 2C. Let me see if we have your favorite vintage today. The older woman across the aisle asked for a glass of still water. Vanessa brought it in a crystal glass, garnished with a lemon wedge as though it were a cocktail. But when she reached 1A, her tone turned clipped. Can I get you anything? She asked, eyes skimming past him to the next seat. No warmth, no smile, just a courtesy tossed out like a breadcrumb. Thomas looked up, met her gaze directly. A cup of coffee would be nice, he said calmly. Vanessa didn't respond right away. There was a moment's pause, an almost imperceptible hesitation, before she gave a stiff nod and walked away. Minutes passed. No coffee arrived. She returned to offer menus to the other guests, making sure to spend extra time with Mr. Walker, explaining the difference between the Wagyu tenderloin and the filet mignon. Thomas waited. Eventually, Claire, noticing the omission, quietly brought him a cup without fanfare. Thomas accepted it with a simple thank you. Their eyes met for a brief second. He gave her a slight nod. She nodded back. But Vanessa had seen it. From the galley, she spotted Claire handing Thomas the coffee. Her jaw tensed, and for a moment her professionalism cracked. I already had it on my list, she said later, brushing past Claire, her tone tight. Next time, wait. I'll handle it. Claire didn't reply. She'd learned arguing with Vanessa wasn't worth the energy. But inside, something twisted. She knew what she had witnessed wasn't a simple oversight. It was deliberate. And worse, it was personal. Meanwhile, in 1A, Thomas sipped his coffee slowly, watching the clouds drift past the window. His eyes were calm, but his mind wasn't still. This wasn't his first experience with quiet dismissal, but rarely had it been so blatant, and certainly not from someone wearing the uniform of an airline he had once built from the ground up with a vision rooted in respect for all passengers. He had created this company decades ago with the idea that dignity wasn't something you earned through status or attire. It was something every traveler deserved. That idea, it seemed, had been lost somewhere along the way. And Vanessa? She was proof of that. But here's what she didn't know. What no one on board had guessed. Thomas Reed wasn't just another elderly man in a wheelchair. He was the founder. The reason this very airline even existed. The reason she had a job. The seat she thought he didn't belong in. He designed it. The policies she claimed to follow. He wrote them. The values embroidered on her uniform sleeve. He lived them. And watching her breeze past him without a second glance was more than disrespectful. It was a betrayal. The cabin rolled forward into cruising altitude, but the tension on the ground floor of first class stayed where it was, unacknowledged, unresolved. Thomas didn't raise his voice. He didn't call her out. That wasn't his way. He simply pulled out his phone. With practiced fingers, he tapped a message and hit send. Short, calm, direct. Somewhere far below in the corporate office of the airline, a light blinked on. And what happened next? No one on that flight saw it coming. Before we continue this powerful story, we want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below and tell us, have you ever been judged for how you looked, not who you were? Because in the next part of this story, Vanessa is about to find out the truth about the man she tried to overlook. And by the time the wheels touch down, her entire world will shift. So don't go anywhere like this video if you believe respect should never depend on appearances, and subscribe for the next chapter in this unforgettable journey. The lesson? In first class, or in life, you never know who's watching. The hum of the engine settled into a steady rhythm as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet. But in the first-class cabin, tension simmered just beneath the surface. Most passengers had returned to their screens, books, and champagne, yet a strange silence lingered, one you couldn't quite name unless you were watching closely. And some were. 2 rows behind Robert Lawson, a middle-aged woman in a cashmere sweater leaned slightly forward her eyes narrowing just a touch when she saw the flight attendant walk past 1A without so much as a nod. She had noticed the way the man in the wheelchair had been ignored earlier at boarding too. She didn't know his name, but something about his calm dignity stayed with her. Even the young man across the aisle, who had been busy typing away on a laptop since takeoff, occasionally looked up, eyes flickering toward the front row, as if sensing that something wasn't right. And then there was Claire, the younger flight attendant assigned to the cabin, who had been watching everything unfold from the galley with a silent storm brewing behind her eyes. Claire had joined the airline just under a year ago, bright-eyed, eager, and deeply respectful of what it meant to serve people from every walk of life. She'd looked up to veterans like Vanessa Cole at first, but the more she worked under her, the more she saw the cracks beneath the polished surface. Vanessa played favorites. She had a radar for wealth and prestige and seemed to operate with an invisible scale, one that judged passengers not by need or courtesy, but by how well they fit her picture of first class. And Robert Lawson, quiet and dignified in his worn military jacket and wheelchair, had never stood a chance. Claire had tried to step in gently earlier when she noticed Vanessa ignoring him during boarding, offering a soft greeting and confirming his seat with a warm smile. But now, as Robert sat in 1A, clearly overlooked for beverage service and visibly excluded from Vanessa's usual charm, Claire felt her frustration mount. She glanced toward the galley cart. My baron. Vanessa was preparing caviar for the man in 2C, laughing at some offhand joke. Not once had she asked Mr. Lawson if he needed anything. Claire took a quiet breath, grabbed a bottle of water, and approached him herself. "Would you like a refill, sir?" she asked softly, her voice warm and genuine. Robert looked up at her, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady but tired. She poured the water and set it down gently on his tray table. "If there's anything else you need, I'm just a call button away." And with that, she moved on, but not before Vanessa saw. From across the cabin, Vanessa's gaze hardened. When Claire returned to the galley, she was greeted with a sharp whisper. "We don't need to coddle him," Vanessa snapped under her breath. "He's not helpless." Claire's jaw clenched. "He's a paying passenger in first class. He deserves to be treated with respect." Vanessa scoffed and rolled her eyes. "You'll understand when you've worked a little longer. Some passengers, they just milk it." Claire bit her tongue, her heart pounding. But what happened next made everything worse. Later in the flight, just after the meal service had begun, There was a small jolt of turbulence, not enough to cause panic, but enough that some passengers tightened their seatbelts. As the plane steadied, Robert reached down slowly to retrieve the cloth napkin that had fallen from his lap. His fingers gripped the edge of the tray table, and as he shifted forward, a tremor in his arm caused the glass of water to tip, splashing across the table and dampening the edge of his slacks. He flinched slightly but didn't call for help. Instead, he began dabbing at it with his napkin quietly, trying not to make a fuss. Vanessa passed by at that moment and stopped short. "Oh dear," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "That's why we try to keep things secure in turbulence." Her voice wasn't kind. It was condescending, layered with judgment. "Would you like me to clean that up, or are you okay down there?" she added, not moving to help. Several heads turned. The man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The woman in cashmere muttered something to her husband. Claire stood frozen in the galley, watching it unfold with a lump rising in her throat. Robert didn't look up. He just kept blotting the water quietly, his expression unreadable. The silence felt deafening. Claire couldn't stay back any longer. She stepped forward, grabbed a towel from the service ward, and knelt beside Robert's seat. "Let me help you with that, sir," she said, gently taking the glass and blotting the water from the tray. "It's no trouble at all." Vanessa, realizing how it looked, turned on her heel and disappeared back to the galley, cheeks flushed with irritation. She had expected Mr. Lawson to stumble, to look frail or incapable, but instead he remained calm, composed, and dignified, even in the face of embarrassment. That moment, that quiet strength, is what made passengers begin to truly see him. They didn't know who he was, not yet, but they felt it. The air had changed. This wasn't just an old man in a wheelchair. This was someone who carried himself with a kind of grace that didn't demand attention. It commanded it. And if you're still watching, stay with us. Because in the next part of the story, the truth about who Robert Lawson really is will come to light. And when it does, every single person on that plane, especially Vanessa, will realize just how badly they misjudged him. Comment below if you've ever been underestimated, and don't forget to like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. Inside the narrow galley at the rear of the first-class cabin, the clatter of ice tongs and the soft hiss of the coffee machine offered a mechanical kind of comfort. But beneath the surface, something bitter simmered. Emily Carter leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes sharp with indignation. Her polished uniform still pristine, her lipstick still flawless, but the mask of professionalism had slipped the moment she believed no one of consequence was watching. "Did you see him?" she muttered under her breath, her voice low but dripping with disdain. "That old man in 1A? In the wheelchair? There's no way he paid for that seat. Probably some last-minute upgrade. First class is supposed to be for paying professionals, not charity cases." Her words, careless and cruel, lingered in the cramped air like a bad smell. Mark, the fellow flight attendant organizing cutlery at the prep station, froze for a moment, his hand tightening around a stack of napkins. He turned slowly, eyebrows raised. "Emily," he said, voice calm but warning, "you don't know that. His ticket's scanned clean. Maybe he belongs there more than any of us realize." Emily scoffed, pushing herself off the counter. "Don't be naive. Look at him. He's wearing an old army jacket like it's still 1970. He didn't even have a briefcase, just some battered duffel bag. You think someone like that books first class regularly? Please." She rolled her eyes, clearly proud of her own assumption. "We bend over backwards for people in this cabin, VIPs, celebrities, high rollers, and then we're supposed to act like every random person who stumbles in with a cane gets the same treatment? No thanks. I know how to prioritize." Mark's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything right away. He just looked at her, really looked, and Emily hated how it made her feel. Judged, exposed. "You know," he said quietly, "that man was nothing but polite, didn't demand anything, didn't even complain when you walked past him 5 times without offering him a drink. You didn't even greet him, Em." She laughed, short and sharp, the sound clashing with the soothing hum of the galley's background noise. "He didn't need me to. He was too busy trying not to spill his water." There was something cruel in the way she said it. She hadn't forgotten the small accident earlier, The spilled glass, the damp napkin. She had watched him fumble without lifting a finger to help. And worse, she'd smirked. "If you ask me," she added with a dismissive wave, "he's lucky we even let him stay in that seat." "Let him stay," Mark repeated, his voice now louder, cutting through the clatter around them. "Emily, he bought that seat. He's not lucky to be there. He has every right. Just because he doesn't fit your idea of first class doesn't mean he doesn't belong." Emily's confidence flickered just for a second. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Mark. Quiet, dependable, always by the book. But her pride flared, drowning out any guilt. "Whatever," she muttered, reaching for the beverage tray. "You'll understand once you've worked as many flights as I have. You'll learn how to read people." Mark stepped in front of her, his voice steady but intense. "Or maybe," he said, "Ishvain, you've spent so long judging people by their luggage and their suits that you've forgotten how to see them at all." The words stung more than Emily wanted to admit. She opened her mouth, ready to snap back. But just then, a gentle knock came from the edge of the galley. Claire stood there, hesitant, her eyes flicking between the two of them. She had clearly heard part of the exchange. "Sorry," she said quietly, "but Mr. Lawson in 1A just asked if he could have some hot tea." Emily's lips pressed into a line. "Then give it to him." Claire nodded but didn't leave right away. Her gaze lingered on Emily for a beat too long, just enough to say what she didn't dare voice aloud. Emily turned away, pretending not to notice, pretending she didn't feel that growing, gnawing discomfort in her chest. But it was there, that tension, that unease. She could feel the cracks forming in the wall of superiority she'd built around herself. For years it had been enough to keep her proud, composed, in control. But now those cracks were spreading, and she wasn't sure what would be left when the facade finally gave way. Behind her, Mark was silent, but his disappointment hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Emily busied herself with restocking the tray, but her hands were unsteady. The weight of what she'd said, what she'd implied, it had left a mark. And somewhere beyond the galley curtain, Robert Lawson sat quietly, sipping the tea that Claire had just handed him, unaware that his name had just become the topic of whispered judgment. Or perhaps he did know. Perhaps he had known from the moment she looked at him like he didn't belong. And if you've ever been misjudged, if someone has ever looked at you and decided you weren't enough based on nothing more than how you looked, then you already understand the pain in that silence. You already know what Robert Lawson felt. So if you believe people deserve better, if you believe character is more than appearance, hit that like button to support Robert. Comment below to tell us if you've ever been in his shoes. And don't forget to subscribe, because the truth is Emily Carter just made the biggest mistake of her career. And what happens next? No one on that plane will forget. The soft chime of the intercom barely registered to Emily Carter as she moved through the first-class galley, arranging glasses for drink service. She was still fuming from her earlier exchange with the man in 1A, the one in the wheelchair, the one who barely looked like he could afford economy, let alone a premium cabin. The way he had looked at her, calm, unbothered, as if her condescension hadn't meant a thing. It annoyed her more than she could say. But that irritation quickly turned into something else when the captain's voice came over the PA. "Flight attendant Emily Carter, please report to the cockpit immediately." Her heart skipped. It was rare, very rare, for a flight attendant to be called to the cockpit mid-flight. Usually when something went wrong, she was the one doing the reporting. She adjusted her navy blue blazer, forced a confident expression onto her face, and made her way down the narrow aisle. Passengers barely looked up as she passed, but Emily couldn't shake the uneasy feeling blooming in her stomach. Something was off. When she knocked gently on the cockpit door and was buzzed in, the atmosphere hit her like a wave. Captain Hayes sat rigid in his seat, his jaw tight. But it was the other face on the communication screen that made her breath catch. Michael Hastings, Senior Vice President of Crew Operations. Why was he on a live feed? Her throat suddenly felt dry. "Emily," Captain Hayes said without turning, "have a seat." She slid into the narrow jump seat behind them, trying not to let her nerves show. "Is there a problem, sir?" Michael's image flickered slightly on the screen. His expression was unreadable, his tone cold and clipped. We've received a direct complaint from a first-class passenger on your current flight, Miss Carter. Emily blinked, trying to keep her voice steady. A complaint? About what? Michael didn't blink. About your treatment of a passenger in 1A. Her stomach dropped. You mean the elderly gentleman? Yes, Michael said. Robert Lawson. The name barely registered. I'm not familiar with him, she said quickly, her voice tightening. There must be a misunderstanding. I was following protocol. No, Michael interrupted. You weren't. Captain Hayes finally turned to look at her, his eyes colder than she'd ever seen them. Miss Carter, do you know who Robert Lawson is? Emily paused, shook her head slowly. Just a veteran, I think. He had a military jacket. Michael leaned forward on the screen. Robert Lawson is not just a veteran, he is the founder of this airline. The words hit like a thunderclap. The founder, the Robert Lawson. The man whose name was etched into every headquarters plaque, every employee training video, every safety award. Her heart began pounding in her chest, fast and loud and dizzying. He's watching everything, Emily, Captain Hayes said, voice low, and he's already filed a formal incident report. Her voice faltered. I didn't know. I didn't recognize him. I thought... You thought he didn't belong, Michael said sharply, because of how he looked, because he didn't fit the first-class image you've built in your mind. Is that correct? Emily opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. She couldn't deny it. That was what she thought. You judge the man who built the very company that employs you, Michael continued, and you did it in front of the entire first-class cabin. Captain Hayes crossed his arms. He's not asking for your termination. Not yet, but he is asking for a full investigation. And I'll be honest with you, Emily, if this goes to the board, they will back his recommendation, whatever that may be. Emily felt like the air had been sucked from the cockpit. She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Michael's eyes narrowed. Do you have anything to say for yourself? She tried. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I just misread the situation. Captain Hayes gave a humorless laugh. You misread Robert Lawson? I didn't know, she repeated, more desperate this time. If I had known who he was. But you didn't, Michael snapped. And that's the point. You shouldn't need to know someone's name or title to treat them with dignity. Silence fell over the cockpit. The only sound was the faint hum of altitude and engine. Emily stared down at her hands, her perfectly manicured nails now trembling slightly. Michael's tone softened, but only slightly. You have a choice, Miss Carter. When this flight lands, you'll be asked to attend a private review. Until then, Mr. Lawson has asked that you continue your duties, professionally, without incident. He'll be observing. That last sentence hit the hardest. Emily nodded, barely able to lift her head. Understood. You may go, Captain Hayes said quietly. She stood, legs stiff, and turned for the door. Just as she reached for the latch, Michael added one last thing. You still have a chance to show who you really are, Emily, but don't waste it. As the door clicked shut behind her, she stood frozen in the dim glow of the aisle lights, her face pale. Her feet felt like they were made of stone. She had just been judged by the most important man in the airline and found lacking. Her stomach twisted with shame, regret, fear. This wasn't a passenger complaint. This was her career unraveling. And if you've ever made a mistake you wish you could take back, if you've ever judged someone too quickly or let pride blind you to compassion, then you know exactly what Emily Carter is feeling right now. She didn't set out to be cruel, but that's the thing about small moments. They add up. They define us. And now all she can do is hope that her actions for the rest of this flight might be enough to begin undoing the damage she's done. If you're still here, comment below. What would you do in her shoes? Encourage her or let her fall? And if you want to see how her story ends, don't forget to like this video, and subscribe for part 2, because one way or another, Emily's going to learn. Emily Carter had walked back down that aisle hundreds of times, heels clicking against the carpet, posture straight, chin lifted with pride. But this time, every step toward the galley felt like she was wading through molasses. The echoes of the cockpit conversation still rang in her ears, each word another crack in the carefully built shell of confidence she'd worn like armor for years. You judge the man who built the very company that employs you. Those words cut deeper than she expected. Robert Lawson, the man she had dismissed without a second thought, the founder of the airline. Her chest tightened, breath catching as the full gravity of her actions began to sink in. This wasn't some entitled passenger looking for a free drink. This wasn't a misunderstanding she could brush under the rug. She hadn't just embarrassed herself. She had embarrassed the entire airline. Her airline. The uniform she wore, once a symbol of professionalism and poise, now felt like a costume stretched too tightly over regret and shame. She stepped into the galley, gripping the counter as if it could ground her spinning thoughts. The other attendants were quiet, giving her space, but their glances said enough. They knew, or at least they'd heard something. Emily could practically feel the questions buzzing behind their silence. What happened? Why was she called to the cockpit? And though no one said it aloud, she could hear the unspoken judgment. Whatever it was, it must have been bad. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a glass of water, trying to still the storm inside her. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this unsteady. She was Emily Carter, the senior attendant, the one who trained new hires, the one passengers complimented in post-flight surveys for her professionalism. She was the one who knew how to handle difficult guests, who held herself with authority in any cabin, who made snap decisions and stuck by them. But now that confidence had turned brittle, and it shattered with every memory replaying in her mind. How she had looked at Robert and made an instant judgment. How she had questioned his place in first class. How she had spoken to him like he was a burden. And the worst part? She hadn't even realized she was doing it. That realization landed with a thud deep in her gut. Her entire career had been built on the illusion of excellence. But now she was starting to wonder, had she always been this blind? How many passengers had she overlooked? How many quiet indignities had she delivered without thinking, just like she did with Robert? Her hand tightened around the glass as a lump rose in her throat. You shouldn't need to know someone's name or title to treat them with dignity. Michael's words in the cockpit circled in her mind like a warning bell. She felt exposed, like her flaws had been held up under a spotlight and there was nowhere to hide. She turned, pressing her back to the galley wall, her eyes glassy but not yet letting the tears fall. Not here, not in front of everyone. But inside, she was unraveling. What would happen now? She had heard the rumors before, crew members who had embarrassed the airline in front of the wrong people. Some were transferred, some were suspended. Others quietly disappeared. No warning, no second chance. Emily had always believed she was immune to that kind of fallout. She was good, efficient, respected. But now she wasn't sure who she was. The curtain parted gently. Claire, the younger attendant who had picked up the slack in first class, stepped in quietly. She didn't speak right away, just stood beside Emily, offering her a moment of solidarity. Emily glanced at her, then looked away, shame tightening her chest. I saw what happened earlier, Claire said softly, with Mr. Lawson. Emily swallowed hard. Of course you did. Everyone did. Claire hesitated. I just wanted you to know I think you're stronger than this. Emily blinked. Stronger than what? Then pretending it didn't matter, Claire said. You messed up. But it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you've got something to face. Emily stared at her, speechless. It was such a simple statement, but it pierced through the storm of her thoughts like sunlight cutting through fog. I thought I was better than this, she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. I thought I knew what I was doing. Claire offered a small, understanding nod. We all do, until we don't. For a moment, the two stood in silence, the hum of the plane filling the air. Emily leaned her head back against the galley wall, tears threatening to spill, but still trapped behind her pride. It wasn't just about her job anymore. It was about the kind of person she was, the kind of person she wanted to be. Do you think I can fix this? Emily asked, her voice a whisper now. Claire shrugged. Maybe, if you're willing to change. Emily closed her eyes, a tear finally escaping. I don't want this to be the end. Then don't let it be, Claire said. You've still got time. The words lingered in the space between them, soft but powerful. And for the first time in hours, Emily felt a flicker of something new. Not confidence, not pride, but resolve. The kind that's born not from power, but from humility. To everyone watching, if you've ever been in Emily's shoes, if you've ever said something you wish you could take back, or made a mistake that haunted you, then you understand the weight she's carrying. But maybe, just maybe, it's in moments like this that real growth begins. Comment below, what would you do if your entire career came down to a single moment of judgment? And if you believe everyone deserves a second chance, especially when they're willing to change, let Emily know. Like this video to support her journey, because the real test is still ahead. Emily stood just behind the curtain separating the galley from the first-class cabin, her palms clammy, her heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird in her chest. She stared down at the floor, willing her breath to steady, but the moment of truth was already pressing in around her. Minutes ago, Robert Lawson, yes, the Robert Lawson, founder of the entire airline, had looked her dead in the eye and told her the truth she didn't want to face. If her disrespect had been public, then so should her apology. And now, here she was, standing on the edge of something she couldn't walk back from. Her pride whispered to stay silent, to move on, to hope the private apology she had offered would be enough. But something deeper, something painful and honest, told her she had no choice but to step forward and face the consequences. With a sharp inhale, she brushed past the curtain and returned to the cabin. The hum of the engines filled the silence between passengers. Some scrolled through tablets. Others sipped wine or leaned back with their eyes closed. But Emily knew the moment she opened her mouth, the entire cabin would become a stage, and she'd be the spotlighted performer. Except this wasn't a performance. This was the moment that would define who she really was, not just as a flight attendant, but as a person. She walked to the front of first class near Robert Lawson's row. He sat there calm as ever, flipping through the in-flight magazine like nothing was out of the ordinary. But Emily could feel the weight of his presence. He wasn't watching her. Yet somehow, he was watching everything. She cleared her throat, her voice catching. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," she began, louder than usual, her voice trembling slightly. "Before we continue the flight, I need to address something important." A few heads turned. A businessman lowered his newspaper. The woman with the designer handbag paused her typing. Claire, her co-attendant, froze mid-step with a tray of drinks in her hands. The tension shifted, coiling in the air like a storm about to break. Emily's hands trembled slightly, but she clasped them together. "Earlier today, I made a mistake," she said. "A serious one. I judged a passenger based on nothing but appearance. I looked at him and assumed he didn't belong in first class. I questioned his right to be here, not because of his behavior or his ticket, but because I let my bias get in the way." Gasps were quiet but audible. Emily pressed on, her throat tightening. "That passenger is Mr. Robert Lawson. Some of you may know who he is, others may not. But what you should know is that he's not only a first-class passenger, he's the man who built this airline from the ground up. And her voice cracked, "I treated him like an inconvenience." She paused, eyes burning. The room had fallen completely still. Even the soft whir of the air vents seemed quieter now. "I didn't just disrespect Mr. Lawson," she continued, softer now. "I disrespected the values this airline was built on. And for that, I am deeply sorry." She turned toward Robert, who had now set the magazine down and was looking at her with a gaze that was neither angry nor approving. Just steady, like he was measuring her soul. "I apologize to you, Mr. Lawson, not because of your title, not because of your influence, but because you deserve better, because everyone does." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Robert gave a slight nod, barely more than a dip of his chin. But to Emily, it felt like a sunrise after a long, cold night. And just like that, the tension snapped. A woman near the front gave a faint, approving smile. The businessman who had lowered his newspaper gave a respectful nod. Claire, still holding the tray, gave Emily a look that was half shock, half admiration. Emily stood there for another beat, letting the silence settle around her like a blanket. Her legs felt weak, her heart still hammering in her chest. But for the first time since the flight had taken off, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt honest, exposed, but free. She stepped back toward the galley, her breath shaky but even. Behind her, the cabin slowly resumed its rhythm, drinks being poured, quiet conversations restarting, but something had changed. not just in the air, in her. This wasn't about a job anymore. This was about growth. This was about undoing years of assumptions, of false confidence, of quiet cruelty disguised as standards. And to you, listening right now, maybe you've been there. Maybe you've made a snap judgment. Maybe you've said something you wish you could take back. Or maybe, like Emily, you've never had to truly face yourself until the moment someone quietly made you realize how wrong you were. If you've ever carried that kind of regret, if you believe in second chances, not the kind you're given, but the kind you earn, then now's the time to show it. Comment below to encourage Emily. Like this story if you believe she did the right thing, even when it was the hardest thing. And subscribe for more powerful stories just like this, because sometimes the greatest journeys don't happen in the sky. They happen in the heart. Emily Carter had spent years perfecting the art of being untouchable. In her 7 years as a senior flight attendant, she had learned how to hold her posture like the armor, deliver the perfect smile like a signature, and wield her authority with precision, always calm, always composed. She thought she understood her job inside and out. But after standing in front of the entire first-class cabin, publicly apologizing to the very man she had humiliated, Robert Lawson, the founder of the airline, something cracked in her, something she couldn't ignore. She had spent so much time enforcing her version of first class, elegance, status, control, that she had forgotten what service actually meant. And now, with hours left on the flight and a corporate review awaiting her upon landing, she realized she had a choice to make. Keep pretending she was in the right, or change. Really change. The moment she stepped away from Robert's seat after her apology, the cabin felt different. Not colder, not hostile, but expectant. Like the passengers were waiting to see if her words had meant anything. So she swallowed her pride, squared her shoulders, and got to work. She began by scanning the rows, not for prestige or power like she usually did, but for need. Her eyes landed on a young woman sitting quietly by the window, her shoulders hunched and her eyes red. Most people might not have noticed, but now Emily was looking differently. She stepped forward gently. "Hi there," she said softly, kneeling slightly beside the seat. "Is everything all right?" The woman blinked, startled. "Oh, yes, no, my mother passed last night. I'm flying home for the funeral." Emily's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. A familiar ache bloomed in her chest. She had lost her own father years ago, but she had buried the grief beneath long hours in polished service. She reached forward, placing a hand lightly on the woman's arm. "I'm so sorry," she said, voice warm and genuine. "Would you like some tea? Or maybe a blanket?" The woman nodded gratefully, tears threatening to spill again. "Tea would be nice." Emily brought it promptly, not just a basic cup, but a full tray. Warm tea, honey, lemon, and even a wrapped cookie. A small gesture, but one that felt right. The woman whispered a thank you, as if the kindness itself was too much to bear. Emily smiled gently and moved on. A few rows back, an elderly man sat fidgeting with the in-flight entertainment screen. His hand trembled slightly as he tapped buttons, each attempt more frustrating than the last. Emily approached and leaned in. "Having trouble?" He looked up with a sheepish smile. "These things are smarter than I am." She chuckled softly. "Don't worry, happens to everyone." She knelt and navigated the screen with ease, finding his preferred movie, Casablanca, a classic. "Good choice," she said with a wink. "Let me know if you need anything else." The man beamed. "You're very kind." But that wasn't something Emily was used to hearing. Kind, not efficient, not professional, not in control, just kind. It hit differently. Back in the galley, she passed Claire, her junior colleague, who raised an eyebrow at her. "You okay?" Claire asked quietly. Emily nodded. "Just trying to do things right." Claire studied her for a moment. "You're doing good." Emily smiled, and for the first time all flight, it felt real. Then came the moment that would stay with her for a long time. A mother in business class was struggling to calm her fussy toddler. The child's cries echoed through the cabin, drawing irritated glances and muffled sighs from nearby passengers. Emily had always treated these situations with practiced distance. A toy, a distraction, then a retreat. But not this time. She stepped up beside the mother and crouched slightly. "Mind if I help?" The mother blinked, exhausted and grateful. Please. Emily reached into her service kit and pulled out a coloring book and a small box of crayons, items she usually kept stashed away. She handed them to the toddler, kneeling to his level. Want to draw a plane for me? She asked with a smile. The boy sniffled, then nodded. Emily stayed with him for a few moments, asking about his favorite colors, showing him how to fold the paper airplane at the back of the book. His cries faded into quiet concentration, and the mother let out a shaky sigh of relief. You have no idea how much that means to me, the woman whispered. Emily did. For the first time in a long time, she truly did. She made her way through the cabin again, but this time she wasn't just checking on passengers. She was seeing them. The nervous young man tapping his leg anxiously. The honeymoon couple whispering excitedly over shared photos. The lonely traveler scrolling aimlessly through an empty inbox. She spoke to each of them. Not with rehearsed pleasantries, but with humanity. And through it all, Robert Lawson watched. He didn't interrupt. He didn't smile. He just observed. And that was enough to keep Emily grounded, because she knew now more than ever that he wasn't watching to see if she messed up again. He was watching to see who she really was. Hours passed, the cabin dimmed as the flight neared its final descent. Emily finished her checks and returned to her station, tired but strangely at peace. She had worked harder on this flight than any other in her career, not because of protocol, not because of perfection, but because she had something to prove. Not just to Robert, not just to the executives waiting at the airport, but to herself. She had been wrong. She had misjudged. She had humiliated someone who had given her everything she had taken for granted. But she had faced it. She had apologized. And now she had taken the first step toward becoming the kind of flight attendant and the kind of person she was meant to be. To you listening right now, maybe you've made a mistake like Emily. Maybe you've looked at someone and failed to see their worth. Maybe you've believed you were right for so long that changing feels impossible. But it's not. It starts with one choice, one apology, one act of kindness. If you believe people can grow, if you've ever hoped for your own second chance, drop a comment to encourage Emily on her journey. Like this story if you think she's on the right path. And don't forget to subscribe, because the flight isn't over yet, and neither is her transformation. The final moments of the flight stretched on like the slow tick of a clock in a courtroom. Emily Carter stood at the front of the cabin, heart pounding in her chest, hands clasped tightly in front of her uniform. Passengers were gathering their belongings, chatting, stretching, going about their routines as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But for Emily, everything had changed. The flight that began with arrogance and control had turned into a reckoning. She had made mistakes, big ones, and for the first time she had been forced to face them in the most public way imaginable. And now, as the wheels of the plane touched down with a soft jolt and the seatbelt sign chimed off, she was waiting for her final verdict. She caught Robert Lawson's gaze as he rose slowly from his seat, adjusting the lapel of his weathered blazer. His eyes met hers, not cold, not cruel, but measured. He said nothing at first, simply rolled his wheelchair toward the exit as if preparing to leave like any other passenger. But just before he passed her, he stopped. You did well today, he said, his voice quiet, low enough that only she could hear it. 4 simple words, yet they hit harder than anything she had heard all day. They weren't flowery or dramatic. They weren't overflowing with forgiveness. But they were real, and that was what mattered most. Emily blinked quickly, forcing herself to keep her composure. Thank you, sir, she whispered. Robert nodded once, then wheeled down the jet bridge and out of sight. And just like that, he was gone. But she wasn't done. The moment he disappeared, a voice crackled through her earpiece. Emily Carter, please report to corporate operations, immediately. Her breath caught. This was it. The meeting. The one she had dreaded since the cockpit call. She had thought the apology was the end, that Robert's approval meant she might be in the clear. But she was wrong. The executives wanted their say, and they had the final word. Her legs felt like concrete as she made her way off the plane. Every step down the jet bridge echoed with dread. She passed flight attendants who gave her sympathetic nods. Mark, who had teased her earlier, gave her a quiet thumbs up. Claire offered a soft, "Shift, you've got this." But it didn't help, not really. Because deep down, Emily wasn't sure she had this. She had never felt so exposed, so human, so fragile. She wasn't walking into that office as the powerful, composed senior flight attendant she had always prided herself on being. She was walking in as someone who had failed, and who might lose everything because of it. At the entrance to the corporate lounge, a woman in a navy pantsuit waited for her. "Emily Carter?" "Yes," she replied, voice almost breaking. "Follow me." They walked down a long corridor, polished tile floors, glass offices on either side, everything pristine and intimidating. Emily tried to breathe evenly, tried to hold on to any last shred of confidence she had left. When they reached the boardroom, the woman opened the door, and Emily froze. It wasn't filled with executives like she had feared. It was just one person. Robert Lawson. Her throat tightened. Her palms went clammy. "Please," Robert said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Have a seat." Emily sat, trying to mask the tremble in her fingers. "I asked to speak to you personally," Robert began. "The executives trust my judgment on this matter. So what happens next is entirely up to me." Emily's mouth went dry. Robert leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "Tell me, Miss Carter, why should you keep this job?" She swallowed hard. The question wasn't unexpected, but the weight of it crushed her. "I've been asking myself that all day," she began. "I thought being a good flight attendant meant controlling everything, keeping passengers in line, maintaining order. But I was wrong. It's not about control, it's about care, about seeing people. And today I didn't just see passengers, I saw people. I saw how far I'd strayed from what this job is supposed to be." Robert didn't react, he just listened. Emily forced herself to continue. "I disrespected you, not because of who you are, but because of what I assumed. And I realize now how many others I've probably dismissed without even realizing it. I'm not proud of it, but I want to change." Silence stretched for a beat. Then Robert nodded slowly. "You made a mistake, but you didn't run from it. You stood in front of a cabin full of people and admitted you were wrong. That matters. A lot of people would never do that." Emily blinked, barely daring to hope. Robert continued, "But change doesn't happen in one flight. One apology isn't enough. What matters now is what you do next." She nodded quickly. "Yes, absolutely. I understand." "I'm not firing you," he said. A gasp of air escaped her chest. Relief swept over her in a rush so sudden, she almost cried. "But," Robert added firmly, "you're on probation. Every flight you take for the next 6 months will be evaluated. Every passenger report will be reviewed. If I hear so much as a whisper that you've slipped back into your old habits, it's over." Emily nodded, eyes stinging. "I understand." "Good," Robert said, standing slowly. "Then we're done here." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You've been given a second chance, Miss Carter. Don't waste it." And with that, he was gone. Emily sat in the boardroom, staring at the empty chair across from her. She felt the tightness in her chest start to ease just a little. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't proud of how this had begun. But she had faced it. She had taken the hardest step. She had owned it. To everyone listening, if you've ever made a mistake, if you've ever judged someone unfairly, if you've ever wanted to be better but didn't know how, it's not too late. Emily was given a second chance. And maybe, just maybe, you can find your own. If you believe in second chances, if you think people can grow, hit that like button and comment below to support Emily's journey. She's not done yet, and neither are you. Subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories like this one, because sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the most meaningful destinations. The sun had already dipped below the horizon when Emily Carter stepped out of the meeting room, her heart lighter than it had been in days. The polished floor of the terminal gleamed under the warm glow of the overhead lights, but it was nothing compared to the glow radiating from within her. She had just come face to face with the man whose quiet strength had unraveled everything she thought she knew about power, service, and respect. Robert Lawson, founder of the airline she worked for, and the very passenger she had once dismissed with a cold glance and a sharper tongue. But instead of destroying her career, he had offered her something she never expected: a second chance. Inside that room, she had laid down her pride. She had stripped away the mask of authority she wore for years and admitted something that had taken her far too long to realize. She had been wrong. Not just about Robert, but about countless other passengers she had judged dismissed or ignored simply because they didn't fit her narrow definition of who deserved first-class treatment. She had looked him in the eye and told him the truth, not to save her job, but because it was time. And somehow that truth had been enough. Robert hadn't offered her praise. He hadn't patted her on the back or sugar-coated the road ahead. He had simply looked at her and said, "You have one chance. Don't waste it." And that was more than enough. Because with that one sentence, he didn't just give her a second chance at her job, he gave her the chance to become someone better. As she walked through the terminal, Emily passed travelers of all kinds. Families with strollers, businessmen in suits, elderly couples holding hands, solo flyers clutching coffee cups and headphones. She saw them differently now, not as names on a manifest or rows in a cabin, but as people, each with a story, each deserving of respect. She reached a window overlooking the runway and paused, watching another plane lift off into the night sky. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to be perfect. She just had to be real, kind, present. She had to do better, not for her job, but because people deserved it, all of them, and she would. She had 6 months to prove it, but she didn't need a deadline to start. That transformation had already begun the moment she stood in the aisle and apologized not just to Robert, but to every passenger watching. The moment she helped a nervous flyer laugh again. The moment she looked at a person and saw their humanity, not just their seat assignment. Emily's story is one of accountability, humility, and growth. It's a reminder to all of us that our assumptions can hurt others more than we realize, and that the power to make things right starts with a single choice. It's easy to judge. It's easy to categorize people based on what we see. But it takes real strength to unlearn those habits, to see past appearances, and to treat every person with the dignity they deserve. So if you've ever made a mistake, if you've ever said or done something you regret, remember this: you are not defined by your worst moment. What matters is what you do next. Emily could have made excuses. She could have blamed the system, the stress, the misunderstanding, but instead she took responsibility. And that's what made the difference. To everyone watching, if you believe in the power of growth, if you believe that people can change, then let's show Emily our support. Leave a comment below to encourage her on this new journey. Tell us, have you ever experienced a moment that changed the way you see others? We'd love to hear your story. And if this story moved you, please take a second to like the video. Not just to support the channel, but to support the idea that we all deserve a chance to grow, a chance to be better. And if you're new here, or if you've been quietly watching from the sidelines, now is the perfect time to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel is a place where stories like Emily's are told, stories that reflect the truth in all of us, the pain, the reckoning, the redemption. Because in the end, this wasn't just a story about a flight attendant, it was about all of us, about the moments when we stumble and the people who show us the mirror when we do, about the courage it takes to face ourselves honestly and the beauty of what can happen when we do. Emily Carter didn't just walk out of that meeting with her job, she walked out with purpose. And next time she steps onto a plane, she won't just be a flight attendant. She'll be someone who remembers, someone who knows better, someone who chooses every day to do better. And isn't that what we all should strive for? Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.